The broadcast is live. Well, Hello to everyone who's listening. I'm Jane Wells, the founder and executive director of Three Generations, and it is my absolute pleasure to be here today with Niko Al-Qadra, who has been a friend of Three Generations and someone whose story we've been following for, I don't know, Nick, 6, 7, 8 years now. Seems like almost a bit of a lifetime.
Almost 7 years.
Cool. So today we're doing this particular live stream. It's our first time doing it direct to our YouTube channel, so that is exciting. But we're doing this because today is the last day of Pride Month. So it is with great pride that I welcome Nick. So Nick, why don't you say a little bit about who you are and how we know each other?
We had met while, my name is Nikos Al-Qadra. I'm a sex trafficking survivor. I also do direct services within the prostitute community, like doing like outreach and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Jane and I met through someone else. Well, she was, I think you were wrapping up with Tricked, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, what I was going to say is that when we were making the documentary Tricked, I spent most of the time trying to find a young man or a boy who had been trafficked without much luck. And then pretty much the day we had wrapped up and we had picture lock, Danielle introduced me to Nick. So he's always been the next project, really. Yeah. And so Nick, since you left the life, you've been to college, you've got your degree, now you're working as an outreach social worker. Would you just start by saying a little bit about where you're at now?
Yeah, I mean, I always stress this with people, to work on your own therapy. Mm-hmm. If you're going to work. I mean, so I pass out condoms and hygiene products. Mm-hmm. I mean, even with just that, you know, it's like because you're going into areas where, like in my case, like I had bought heroin in one of the areas we work at. Mm-hmm. Had I not worked on my own recovery, mm-hmm. that could cause me to relapse. Mm-hmm. So it's for people to like go and do their own therapy and really like actually know what their triggers are before working in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess that might be interesting for people to hear a little bit about how you were recruited and how, you know, your family treated you in your teens.
So I came out. My father had found out about my sexuality when I was 17. That erupted into a fight. And then my parents had kicked me out. And when I came into Chicago, like the gay area of Chicago, I met some kids. And then I went back to my car. When I went back to my car, I wasn't really paying attention. I was just like digging stuff out of the backseat of my car. Next thing I know is I wake up with one dude having me in a chokehold, and then the other guy was peeing down my throat. The guy that was peeing down my throat, that was who came into him. Wow. And they had introduced me to, after he got done urinating, he introduced me to crack cocaine, process called like shotgun. It's sort of gold into.
So, I mean, one lesson we can all sort of take home from that is that, and especially as it is Pride Month, is that, you know, if parents don't accept the sexuality of their children, they make their children extremely vulnerable to some pretty nasty people, right?
And whether, you know, even if I was forced, had I not even been forced into it, I would have gone into the sex industry regardless.
Why?
Because there's no options for throwaways. Mm-hmm. Throwaways, runaways, or whatever you want to call it. There are no the options. It's like spanging, scripting, prostitution, or stealing. And I just, out of those 4, like, I went with prostitution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't want to damage hurt other people.
Mm-hmm. And would you say at this point that you damaged yourself instead?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, at the time, even when I escaped the first pimp, I knew what was doing to me was affecting me mentally.
Mm-hmm. And did you have a series of pimps during your time in the life?
I had 5.
Okay. And would you say that the experience got better as you were in the life longer, or did it get worse? Was it much the same? What was the?
Robert was my first pimp. I don't know. I always call him the Nazi and stuff like that because he's German. My mom's half Jewish, so I don't know why I find that funny, but I guess you need that kind of dark humor too.
Yeah, dark humor helps, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. He was the most physically violent. Now, the third pimp, that was the mafioso one. He used more threats of violence. That was the one where he, first, they did this really nice grooming process, giving me money and clothes. I'm not having to have sex with people. And he was fitting that role of a daddy for me. Mm-hmm. Getting appreciation from a man what I kind of wanted from my own father. Because I think he was around my dad's age. So and then the night before, I met with the first politician that they hooked me up with. And then he's like, "Oh, I need to take you. Let's go for a ride." And so we're going for a ride, and he brings me up to the Belmont Rocks. And at the Belmont Rocks, he proceeded to tell me that if I talked about anything, that he'd gut me open like a fish and throw me into the lake like human garbage. And that's where I said the violence was kind of different. His was more psychological.
Okay, so I'm just thinking about this now. Those types of threats, they are real, aren't they?
Yeah, they are real.
Yeah. And when we talk about, this is one of the things that I was going to get to maybe later on in the conversation, but as we're here, I've been wondering a lot about that. We hear, especially in this month, about this politician and that one who may or may not be in the closet or whatever. Obviously, people they pay to have sex with aren't signing NDAs. How do they protect their anonymity? Especially the ones who...
Threats of violence.
Yeah, threats of violence. Okay. And would you say from your experience...
It's not like they bring out a form and okay, you have to sign this.
Yeah.
It's no, we're going to kill you if you talk.
Mm-hmm. And how high... Yeah, and how high up the political hierarchy have your clients been or gone?
Very high up. We'll leave it at that.
Okay. So the threats still exist for you today, even though you've been out of the life for over a decade now. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. So we will respect that. So let's talk a little bit about getting out of the life too.
Yeah. What happened for me was a friend of mine had got murdered, and she was killed by her pimp. But this was he took her to California and killed her. It wasn't like he took her just to California to kill her. He was with her for a while out there, and then she tried to flee. He took a baseball bat to her. And when I found out about it, I flew out to California, and someone had flew with me. I can't remember the direct, like, I can't remember everything. It's like really spotty.
Mm-hmm.
And when I came out there, like, the cop had said to me, no one cares about a dead whore, go home. Because I thought, because all the people that I was screwing,
Mm-hmm.
I thought I had protection. You know, like, I thought I could do anything I want, you know, like, get anything done. Because that was what I was accustomed to in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't have that clout there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it told me that I was just basically a fancy whore. And it took me about a year to fully come out of the life.
Mm-hmm. How does it feel if somebody tells you you're a fancy whore?
But I don't like other people to call me a fancy whore. That's just one way for me to describe it.
Mm-hmm. Somebody just has a question here. Do you still fear for yourself if you were to out any politician now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, and
very much.
Would you say that the hypocrisy of politicians is sort of equally Democratic or Republican, or have your clients' abusers tended to be more from one side of the political fence than another?
My experience, all of them are Republican.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what do you put that down to?
It wasn't just that they were Republican. They were the most extreme, and they would put in like laws that went against gays, like open gays. Mm-hmm. Most anti-gay. Like, they were so extreme about it. But then the hypocrisy of it was they were buying me for sex. I mean, along with other males.
Mm-hmm. 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 So how do you explain that? I mean, what do you think the psychology behind that really is?
I think the psychology behind it is like, okay, I can take and marginalize a group. Mm-hmm. The more and more I marginalize, more and more I ostracize a group, I can exploit them for sex, labor, and whatever I want from them.
Mm-hmm. 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 Well, while we're okay, somebody's saying, how do you understand the hypocrisy of the politicians? So,
yeah,
is it understandable? Is it forgivable? Does it need to end?
Yeah, it needs to end.
Okay, so, you know, every year we have this Pride Month, right? So it's a time where people can openly speak about their sexuality and their sexual preferences. In your experience in your lifetime so far, have you seen a broader acceptance of that? Or do you think we're still stuck?
I think we're still stuck.
So any ideas about how?
One way to give an example of it, in Inglewood neighborhood, they started targeting trans who are working in the area, and they were like shooting them with paintballs, screaming like, you know, like anti-gay slurs at them. Well, I shouldn't say dumb, young ladies.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But, and who's the they there?
Homophobic young males, or anti-LGBT is really what it should.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a question here. Where do you see political hypocrisy in 10 years? Will we move the needle at all?
We got to get rid of Trump.
Okay. Yeah.
And we have to get rid of people like Mike Pence, Lindsey Graham. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we really have to do something about the homophobia. And let's talk a little bit about racism in the LGBTQ community. First of all, racism directed towards the community, and then about racism within it.
Okay. I can only really think of the racism within it much more, because that's more my experience. Like my father's brown.
Mm-hmm.
My mom is Turkish, Jew, and Dutch.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the racism, I mean, the racism within it is extremely high, at least from what I've experienced. Now, I pass for white.
Mm-hmm.
No one can, like, people are going to look and say, okay, they see all these different, like, ethnicities and different races in me. They just think that I'm white. So then that makes it so these white males, where I've had very brief friendships with, think they can say, like, racial slurs in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, one freely said the N-word, and I had lost, because I have a lot of cousins of mine are I had a couple cousins that are half black, and a lot of my friends are African American as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I reacted with violence,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, maybe that wasn't the appropriate thing to do, but I considered the N-word a very violent term.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I noticed this month, since the murder of George Floyd, and the general this protesting for racial justice, is that the Black trans community has been much more elevated into the protest and the general, at least the kind of dialogue people like us have. I mean, presumably that's a good thing. We can really talk about the particular plight of Black trans women.
Yeah, Black trans women is how we got our gay rights, our modern gay rights.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Black trans woman that stood up to the cops
Mm-hmm.
when the police are doing the raids of Stonewall.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of gay males forget that, because they're caught up within their own, like, racist values,
Mm-hmm.
or they're just racist, and that's all they think about. Like, they don't think about, they have no respect to the people that gave them their rights.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So 50 years later, it's a really important moment for us to honor. Yeah. Thank you.
And more than just putting, like what we were talking about, like with the corporate displays, and I mean, I don't know. I have a lot of issues with the gay pride parades now, because like in the past, it was about like people representing different areas of profession, like areas that they worked in. Like, gay can be anything. I mean, and now it just looks like, I don't want to. It's kind of like a circus, and like the circus area of a freak show. At least that's how I feel about it. I mean, other people may have different opinions, but I don't feel like it really represents, like people like me.
Well, I noticed particularly last year in New York how much the corporate advertising there was with some huge corporations, and you do wonder whether if you go in as a Black trans woman into said bank trying to get a loan for your business, whether they're going to be quite as welcoming as their advertising and marketing would have you believe.
Well, even that part. How often do you see Black trans women elevated in pride, like in the parade? It mostly consists of white gay males.
Well, which leads me to this question here. Is the hypocrisy of being gay and racist common?
I wouldn't. Yeah, I would say that.
Yeah. I mean, that's really, that really gets back to the core issues of structural racism in this country, doesn't it?
Right.
That we can be 50 years into this celebration of gay rights, and yet those people who have won those rights are then trampling on the rights of their brothers and allies, brothers, sisters, and allies, I should say.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's just something that, I don't know, I just feel like a lot of it isn't talked, like, it's more like we're spat at, but we're not coming up with solutions within the gay community.
Mm-hmm. So if you could sort of dream how you would like things to be, how would it be?
Elevate Black trans women.
Mm-hmm.
Elevate people of color more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Getting rid of the White Boys Club, because the White Boys Club even dates back to when the AIDS crisis happened.
Mm-hmm.
Like they focused primarily just on gay white boys. They were focusing on men of color.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, as I think I do, you have friends in the Native American community. How does the gay community amongst Native people fit into this ranking of racism and hypocrisy?
We're not even talked about. Because I don't know if you know, but my dad's mother is Native.
I didn't know that.
I was like, you know.
Well, maybe I wasn't paying attention. I don't know. Anyway, go on.
But yeah, I just feel like the Native community isn't represented at all.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you should say that, because this very morning when I heard that the United States is sending ventilators to Moscow and to the Russians, it occurred to me that maybe they could have started with sending some to some of the most hard-hit Native American communities before we send them,
But I have a friend of mine, she's Native. She's full-blood Native. And she is a teacher at Santa Fe.
Mm-hmm. And
what she's been doing is she's been doing these drives for Navajo Nation.
Mm-hmm.
And she's been running, like toiletries, like all kinds of things, because they're so cut off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There is a question here. How is gay activism different now than it was in the 70s and 80s?
I think it differs now, because now it seems more like we're having to protest racism in the gay community more.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We're
having to demand for rights for trans women or trans people.
Mm-hmm. I think that movement seems to come more from young people, doesn't it? So there's, it's like the children and the grandchildren of that generation seem to be moving the needle forward perhaps now. Yeah, which is a good thing. Okay, so what else needs to change? We need to unmask all these hypocrites in the Republican Party, obviously. Will we be able to do that if we have a change of leadership, or not so much?
A complete change of leadership.
Yeah.
Also, too, like even the Democrats, some of them have to go.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them, they're more like corporate elitist type, they need to go. Because they're not really, I would call them more like liberals, mm-hmm. but they themselves, they're not authentic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, one thing that, I think we did a little promo video for this conversation where we tried to highlight some of the sort of misunderstandings about gay sex workers, but let's circle back to some of those. What are things that people need to understand about gay sex work?
Oh, I think one of the things that I always like to talk about is the fact that just because you're a gay male does not mean you enjoy sleeping with grandpa for money.
Okay. Yeah.
Because they have it in books and research studies where they'll say if it's gay for pay means a straight male being paid for gay sex. They consider that exploitation. They don't consider it exploitation when it's a gay male.
Well, that's sort of definitionally discrimination, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And that, go on.
Trying to think what other things that need to change within it. I think there needs to be more protection, like legal protection for people that are in sex work. Because, I mean, no matter like if you believe, like no matter on what scope of what you believe in, like if it's full decriminalization or the Nordic model, or forget what they're calling it now. They need to protect the actual workers, and there need to be like hate crime protections and stuff like that, because these tricks, from what I've heard, is the tricks are getting more violent.
Well,
hold on a second.
Yeah, well, we are. I mean, it is the most dangerous profession in the world. We know that, and I'm thinking that proper healthcare for sex workers should be a basic human right at this point.
Right.
I think you and I agree that that socialized medicine is a good thing too. Does your social work cross over with these issues at all, and how? And if so, how often?
One of the things I've noticed is we'll have our trans ladies coming up, and the trans women, they'll be wanting places to go for rehab. The places will not take them because they're trans and not women. Or not,
And if they go to a male facility, then they're going to be beaten up and victimized.
Beaten up, and it'd be like me going. Yeah, it'd be like me going to jail.
Now that's really disconcerting and depressing, isn't it? Yeah. So that would be like a first stage of activism that we should get on board with, having proper rehab facilities for trans women. Yeah.
And I mean, not to be rude, but having it exclusively for trans women, because there haven't. I've been around for a while, and like they'll have rehabilitation centers, but like they'll be open to trans, but then they also accept gay men, and even then, like there's problems with that, mainly coming from the gay men.
Yeah, I guess that you don't have a very high opinion of the behavior of a lot of gay men in this community.
No, I don't. It's not why I'm single.
Okay. Well, let's just say a little bit more about that, because I think it's an important thing that people need to hear, to get to the whole idea, get everyone off their pedestal.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there needs to be more acceptance within the community. I had read somewhere that they're even trying to do an LGBT community and excluding the trans.
Wow.
Which, I mean, that floors me, pisses me off, makes me very angry, and very ungrateful, because that's how we got our rights. Was from trans women and trans women of color.
Right. Well, I guess, do you just, before we wrap up, do you just want to say a little bit about the organization you're working for now? Or
Yeah. I work with Dreamcatcher Foundation. And what I do with Dreamcatcher is I go out and I do outreach. And, you know, it's letting people know that you care. Because, like, yeah, okay, you're giving condoms to people and you're giving, like, hygiene products. However, it's still, when I was out in the life, I didn't have that. I mean, what the things I got were like bottles thrown at me. Like, that was the kind of like reception that I got from that.
So was there anything that you learned in life from when you were a young man in the life? Was there anything that you learned that you're actually grateful for at this point?
I'm actually grateful for, you know, like, some people may think I'm crazy, like some other survivors, but I'm actually grateful for the life. The game taught me a lot about business. It taught me a lot about street smarts, like what to watch, how to like handle myself. I mean, I was raised in a very political family, but the political knowledge that I gained, you know, hooking as a hooker, it was far outrageous. I mean, because I learned more about like hypocrisy. I learned how like the game, how all the rules go down, like how the political system actually works. Because, you know, clients can talk a lot to their hookers. Because in the beginning, yeah, I was a street prostitute, but then I became an escort. An escort, you know, like I'm going by the hour, sometimes overnight, and that gives a lot of time talking. And since I didn't really like having sex with, I would say my grandpa, like I'll just say grandpa, or like somebody older than my father, kind of freaked me out. I learned the gift of gab. I learned how to just talk. Pull. I mean, I think it's part of what helped me as a therapist, because I've learned how to like pull information out of people.
Okay, so what information should I pull out of you before we conclude this conversation?
Trying to think what else. What is it that you want to?
I don't know. I'm just thinking about, I mean, what do we do about, you know, about the hypocritical politicians? I mean, how should they, I mean, unmasking them obviously is important, because
I had an idea where I pitched it to this reporter, because when a certain politician came out about a scandal, and that politician happened to be a part of my initial gang rape when I got like what the Pimps call seasoning, and or like when you get turned out or whatever. And then I also had that politician too later on as an escort, and he said to me, he's like, "Oh, I thought you were just a street hustler. You're moving up in the world." Like, that was something that he had said.
Nice.
And so I was talking to this reporter. I said, and he didn't like it because, like, he's one where he outs the politicians, but he does it one at a time. I told him you're doing things half-assed backwards. You need to do it where you out them all at once. So then there's nowhere they can hide. But when you do the outing, you make sure you protect the person that's being prostituted. You protect their identity and make sure their identity is kept secret.
Well, I guess that, you know, this is what happened with the Me Too movement. So maybe it's, you know, It's time. It sounds like it's time. Maybe it's coming. Maybe by next, by Pride 51, we'll get there. Well, I think it's time for us to pretty much wrap this up. So thank you. But is there anything else that you want to say or share? I
would say, like, one thing I would like to focus on is really opening up a rehab center in Chicago. Mm-hmm. We don't even have a drop-in center for trans or gay men that are in the life, and figuring out a way of fundraising.
Okay.
I mean, if that's at all possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's something that we can certainly talk about behind the scenes here. But thank you. I think that, I mean, it sounds like we really need to focus on the human rights of the trans community. Somebody's saying thank you for sharing your experience in your life. I want to thank you too. It's really, I love talking to you. I've interviewed Nick several times over the years, and we're still working on our end piece, aren't we? But thank you for doing this, and thank you for the outreach work you're doing. I think they're lucky to have you and meet you, and we'll all circle back and celebrate when some of those politicians whose names we dare not speak are unmasked as they should be. So thank you. And thank you to everyone who's listened.
Yeah, so thank you everyone that's listened.
Yeah.
And thanks for having me on, Jane.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. My honor. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. So